Hello again. In this video, we'll have a look at mountains in and around East Asia here and distances between mountains. And this mountain comes in pairs of distances where the ratio between the kilometer and the mile orders the pairs. And you can probably see all these yellow lines here. And those are distances between these mountains. And these are the big mountains in this area. From East Asia here, stretching all the way actually into North America and down to Oceania here. There are, I think, 10 pairs of distances that we look at between these mountains. And I'll start off in this first video, this first part, covering the 5 of the pairs, and then the rest, the final 5 pairs in part 2. So now I'll just have to remove half of the pairs here and begin with the first 5 pairs in this part 1. So here we are, and these are the first 5 pairs of distances we look at, and they are ordered, each pair, by the kilometer-mile ratio. If I just take away the final 3 pairs and begin with the first 2 pairs here, and I'll also show you which mountains then, as I go, which mountains are involved. And they are the big ones. So these are the first 2 pairs of distances. And the one I start with is up here. Here we have Japan, and here we have Korea. And on the central island, the large island of Japan, Mount Fuji is, of course, the highest mountain. And if you go south from Mount Fuji, we come to the large southern island of Japan. And the highest mountain there is Mount Kuju-san, this one. So that's one distance, Mount Fuji to Mount Kuju-san. And the other is from Mount Fuji to this mountain in North Korea, and the highest mountain in North Korea and all of the Korean peninsula. And that's Mount Paektu-san. So Mount Fuji to Mount Paektu-san is as 1 mile, while Mount Fuji to Mount Kuju-san is as 1 kilometer. Very near exactly. And then I'll also show you the next pair here. And this one, here we have 2 distances, and they are measured from Jade Mountain here on this island, Taiwan. And Jade Mountain is Taiwan's highest mountain, and it has a distance to Mount Hallasan on this island south of South Korea, which is South Korea's highest mountain. And then we have Jade Mountain to Mount Pulag on the large northern island of the Philippines here. And it's the highest mountain there and the second highest in all of the Philippines. And here we have the ratio. Jade Mountain to Mount Hallasan is 1 mile, while Jade Mountain to Mount Pulag is as 1 kilometer. Again, 1 mile and 1 kilometer. Very, very near exactly. So I thought we'd start by measuring then the first 2 distances there. Mount Fuji to Mount Paektu-san first in miles here. And here we have the very peak of Mount Fuji after it clears up in a little while. And here is the measure tool then, and we'll measure in... As always, I've tried to locate the very highest peak on any mountain here, and on Mount Fuji, this is the location of the high point. So let's measure from Mount Fuji then to Mount Paektu-san in miles. And here we have the very high point of Mount Paektu-san on the rim of the crater here, this volcanic mountain peak. Sorry, here is the very peak, right here. And here we have a distance of, if you look in the measure tool, around 734.45 miles. 734.45. And a little bit longer in the other value here. So let's remember around 734.4 to 5 in miles. Let's shift to kilometers now and fly back to Mount Fuji and measure the next distance. from Mount Fuji to Mount Kujyu-san, where we should then find a distance of around 734.4 in kilometers here. So let's measure. Mount Fuji to Mount Kujyu-san, the highest mountain on Japan's large southern island. And its very peak is right here. And if you look in the measure tool now, we have a distance of just under 734.4 kilometers in the top row here, and a little bit longer in the other value. So very, very near exactly. The ratio here is exact as 1 mile and 1 kilometer between these two distances. And these are the top peaks, if you will, here. So that's the first example. Let's now measure the two distances from Jade Mountain, Taiwan's highest mountain. And first then north to Mount Hallasan, South Korea's highest mountain, and in miles. And here is the peak of Jade Mountain, right around here. Let's measure from there to Mount Hallasan. South Korea's highest mountain there. And the highest point I was able to find was just around here. And the distance we have is in miles 760.6 up to around 761 in miles. 760.6 or 761, just around there. Let's go back to Jade Mountain and measure in kilometers then to that high mountain on the northern Philippine island, Mount Pulag, where we should then find around 761, let's say, in kilometers. So let's measure that. And here we have the peak of Mount Pulag. And as you can see, right around there is the peak. As you can see, we then have 760.8 kilometers or 761.2. So a little bit more in value, but very tiny discrepancy here. So that we have there the ratio very near exactly of 1 kilometer in this distance and 1 mile in this second distance. So 1 mile here and 1 kilometer here, almost exactly. So those were then the first two examples. Let me click these away and continue with the next example here. And now we're going to move inland into the mainland of Asia and China, around China here, and add these two distances. If I zoom out a little bit. Here we have Mount Taibaishan here, and that's considered the highest mountain in eastern China, this area here. And it has a distance to this mountain we saw previously, North Korea's highest, Mount Paektusan. Think of that distance as 1 mile. And then Mount Taibaishan has a distance to this mountain up here, way to the north, west, you could say. And that's Mount Gora Beluga. And that's the highest mountain in the Altai mountain range here, and considered the highest mountain in central Siberia here, this vast area. So, and this distance, the second one here, is as 2 kilometers, while the first from Mount Taibaishan to Paektusan is as 1 mile. So let's fly down and measure these and see how exact this is. So Mount Taibaishan then, to first Paektusan and then Gora Beluga. And the first distance here is then in miles to Mount Paektusan. Right around here is the peak of Taibaishan. So let's measure then to Paektusan. And here we have a mile distance of just around 1 1,236 miles. A little bit under and over in these two values here. 1,236. You can see the numbers here. And if we double that, we get 2,472. 2,472. So let's go back to Taibashan and measure to that other mountain, Gorabaluka, in kilometers, where we should then find around 2,472 kilometers. So let's see. And here is that mountain, Gorabaluka, and its very peak is right around here. So let's attach the line just around the peak here after it's cleared up a little bit. Right around there. And you can see we have just under 2,471 kilometers and just over 2,472 in the two values. So very nearly then 2,472 in kilometers. And that makes it, and that then is, we have the ratio here between these two distances of this longer line here, 2 kilometers, and this shorter 1 mile. So that was that pair. Let's continue with the next pair of mountain distances. These two. Here. North of Taibashan, we have this Mount Wutai in China, and it's considered northern China's highest mountain. And it has two distances. One is to Mount Gongar down here, and it's the highest mountain in the world east of the Himalayan mountain range that ends sort of here. And it is a very high mountain at around 7,500 meters. And then Mount Wutai has a distance to this Taiwanese mountain, Jade Mountain also, the highest mountain here. And the ratio between these two is again the one we saw just recently. Mount Wutai to Mount Gongar is as 1 mile, while Mount Wutai to Jade Mountain is as 2 kilometers. So let's measure that now. So from Mount Wutai first to Gongar, Mount Gongar, in miles. And right around here is the peak of Mount Wutai. And let's fly to Mount Gongar. And the very peak of Mount Gongar, after it clears up, is just around here in a second or two. Right there, as far as I've been able to find it, around 7,450 meters here in Google Earth. And the distance you see is just around, in the top row here, 933.33 miles. If we double that, we get 1,866.66. And that is then what we should find in kilometers in the next distance now, from Mount Wutai to Jade Mountain. So let's first measure from here, Mount Wutai's peak to Jade Mountain. Here we are at the very peak of Taiwan's highest mountain. And after it clears up, hopefully, I think there it is, yes. And this is right around the peak here, and here we have a very exact relationship. You can see the distance here. We have that 1,866.66 kilometers here. So very exactly here we had the ratio in these two distances of 2 kilometers in this distance and 1 mile in the shorter one here. So 1 mile and 2 kilometers was the ratio there. Now we're going to keep the distance here between Mount Wutai and Mount Gongar. So let's keep that distance and take away the other there. and add this distance now. Mount Gongar to Mount Pulag, this distance here. Mount Pulag we saw previously, the highest mountain on the large northern island of the Philippines, and the second highest in all of the Philippines. And the ratio here is such that Mount Gongar to Mount Wutai is as 1 kilometer, and Mount Gongar to Mount Pulag is as 1 mile. Very near exactly, so let's measure. First Mount Gongar to Mount Wutai again, but this time the kilometer value of this distance. And here then is the peak, and we'll attach the line here. And fly to Mount Wutai again. You see in the kilometer value of this distance, we have around 1,502 here, and then a little bit longer, just above a kilometer longer in the other value. But around, let's say, 1,502 up to 1,503 in kilometers. So let's go back to Mount Gongar and measure to that other mountain, Mount Pulag. And this time in miles. So here we have Mount Gongar and then off to Mount Pulag. Again at the peak of Mount Pulag then, and you can see in the window there, here is a peak, that we have 1,501.4 just about, and then 1,502.6 in miles. And the average of that is a little bit over 1,502 miles. So that corresponds very well with the kilometer value we had in the other distance. So there we had the ratio of very near exactly here, this shorter distance, 1 kilometer, and this longer distance, 1 mile. So those were the the 5 pairs of distances that are ordered by the kilometer-mile ratio that I wanted to show in this video, part 1, of sort of Asian mountains ordered by the kilometer mile. So in the next part 2, I'll take the rest of the pairs, five pairs again.